Hello and welcome to AmericanNavalHistory.com. My name is John Sorensen, and I'm putting together a series and set of presentations to teach about the history of the United States Navy. Before I retired from the Naval Reserve, one of my duties was to make and present these lessons to the Naval Reservists who were ordered to sit through them. Recently, I found a box filled with my old 3.5-inch discs containing these PowerPoint presentations. Now I am making voiceovers to post up onto AmericanNavalHistory.com. But before I get started, I would like to make one thing clear about their content. Yes, this is about the history of the United States Navy. But Navy history, like Navy operations, do not and did not happen in a vacuum. U.S. Navy history is a subset of U.S. military history, and military history is a subset of U.S. history in general. So, in order to fully cover the Navy, I will sometimes discuss economic, political issues. I will sometimes talk about the Army and Air Force activities. I will talk about diplomatic situations, and of course, the United States Marine Corps. Knowing these wider scope issues will be invaluable to the understanding of the Navy's role in the big picture. But please trust me and bear with me through these times, and it will all tie together as a presentation of Navy history. Thank you. Let us begin by discussing some of the causes of the Revolutionary War and the status of the military forces on both sides before the war. We should never confuse the American Revolution with the Revolutionary War. The war was merely a mechanism that was necessary to move the revolution forward. The American Revolution was a much larger cultural, economical, spiritual, religious, and political event. The revolution was the Enlightenment and the Great Awakening brought together into the hearts, minds, souls, and spirits of the American colonists. The ideas and the writing of John Locke, George Whitefield, Adam Smith, and Jonathan Edwards were commonly read throughout America, and the American people were determined to enact them. This is what they called the Spirit of '76. 17th and 18th century Americans were very much a seafaring people. When I say the 18th century, I mean the 1700s. Just as the 1900s were called the 20th century, historians call the 1700s the 18th century. 18th century colonists all lived very near to the Atlantic Ocean, or at least a navigable waterway with access to the Atlantic Ocean. All the cities of the time, such as Boston, New York, Charleston, Jamestown, Annapolis, were all seaports. Even Philadelphia was on the Delaware River, which provided it access to the Atlantic Ocean. Whenever somebody traveled from one city or from one colony to another, they usually traveled by sea. Roads across the land connecting the cities and the colonies were very rough, if they existed at all. The oceans were the lines of communication between the colonies. A large portion of the American people made their livings from the sea. Americans were fishermen, whalers, and traders. Others worked in professions that depended on those industries. Americans built boats, they built ships, they cut lumber to build the boats and ships with. They piloted the ships, they repaired the ships, they serviced them. They were blacksmiths. The American economy depended greatly on the marine industries. Let's talk about the Navigation Acts. As far back as 1651, the British imposed the Navigation Acts on all their colonies. I should actually say the English imposed these acts, because it wasn't until about 1707 that Great Britain was finally unified. So at this point, the Navigation Acts were put out to all the colonies. They were not put out. They did not pass the Navigation Acts to pick on the Americans. It was for all the colonies worldwide. These Navigation Acts require that the colonies trade only with England or Great Britain. When the colonies traded directly with other countries such as Holland or France or Spain, the British felt left out and left out of the profit. The whole purpose of having these colonies was to make profit. The reason for the Britain to have an empire at all was to make money, and if the colonies conducted their own trade without the mother country, Great Britain would lose out. Great Britain, actually, and England, they paid the expenses to found all these colonies all around the world. They did all the governing, they did all the administrating, and it was their army and navy that protected the colonies. So they felt entitled to expecting a share of the colony's profit, and rightly so. But one recurring theme in American history is that any time a government imposes a new tax on the people will resist paying it. And some people will go to great lengths to avoid paying the new taxes. And again, the Navigation Acts were no exception to that rule. And I tell you what, I'm not sure that I can come up with any exceptions to that rule whatsoever. So it's pretty safe to say that if you put a new tax on the people, somebody will always try to avoid paying it. Tax avoidance, unregulated trade, and smuggling became very common in the American colonies. This was especially true after the Sugar Act of 1764. This Sugar Act of 1764, that prevented the colonies from trading directly with the French and the Dutch in the Caribbean and the East Indies. John Hancock's father and John Hancock himself made great profits with this unregulated trade, or what the British called smuggling. Widespread smuggling caused the British to begin patrolling around the American seaports, and now the British are patrolling not to help the American people, but to impose their rule over the American people. So the British ships were becoming more of a police force than protectors of the colony. Now, we need to talk about the condition of the British Navy in the middle of the 18th century. There's no disputing that Great Britain was a worldwide empire in the middle of the 18th century. All military experts and historians will agree that they were only able to build and maintain their empire because they themselves were a seafaring nation with a dominating navy force. The British Navy was the lifeblood of the British Empire. The British experienced great economic recession, or maybe I'll say depression, following the 7-Year War with France, or what we would call the French and Indian War. Although they won the war, they emerged from it with a huge amount of debt. There was great corruption in the British Admiralty. The Navy contracts were given as payoffs to people. No money was available for maintenance or repair of the ships, and those wooden ships required a lot of maintenance to prevent the wood from rotting in the salt water in the sunshine. The officers were given commission and promotions based on their family connections, not by their merit. Didn't matter how good the man was, if he was politically connected or by family, by blood connected, he would get his promotion and get the high-level jobs. Added to all these problems of lack of resources, disrepair, and lack of maintenance, the corruption of the Admiralty was the ever-increasing size of the empire. The British Navy was being tasked with servicing, connecting, and protecting all these mini colonies all around the world, and the Navy was just plain overstretched and overburdened with all this. It was stretched way beyond its capability and was totally unprepared for another war. Now let me take a minute or two to talk about the pre-war situation on the land. I have given you a good description of the maritime situation and how the American people were seafaring people and how the British Navy was big and strong, but it was falling into economic disrepair. Now we need to say a little bit about how and why the colonial militias were set up and organized outside the control of the British military. Colonial militias were always there since the beginning of the colonies. They were organized and formed long before tensions developed between the British and the colonies. From their very foundation, each colony required each town to form a local militia unit. Colonial law required each male member, each citizen above the age of 16 to become a member of the local militia. The original purpose of these local militia groups were to defend the town or the village from Indians, and pirates, or bandits. The militias were a little bit like today's reserves. They were made up of local farmers and bankers, shopkeepers, blacksmiths, who could be called up for service at a moment's notice. That is why they were called the Minutemen, because they were always ready to fight in 1 minute. What they did when they went out to work on the farms, they had a bag full of all their powder, their musket balls, and their musket all sitting in one place. So when guy came by on a horse saying, "Come on, let's go," all they needed to do was grab their war bag and go. So they were ready to go literally within a minute. So most units, especially in the northern colonies, held elections where the soldiers actually voted for who would be the officers. This meant that the officers had to answer to the members to retain their votes, so that they can keep their position of leadership. You had to please the people under you. So the leadership positions usually went to the most influential or the wealthiest people in town. Say the guy employed half the people in the militia on his farm or in his factory, but he was the one that they would all vote for to be the militia leader, because they followed his orders, at their day jobs. So when they go to the militia meetings, it's just natural for him to be their leader. So it usually went to the most influential or the wealthiest person, the biggest businessman, the biggest farmer in town. If you had power in your local community, you usually won the election and became the highest-ranking officer. By the middle of the 18th century, the Indian and the pirate threats had pretty much subsided. Most Indians had either moved westward or assimilated into colonial society. Now, assimilation of the Indians into colonial society was very common at that time. So the militias had pretty much lost their initial purpose of being, but they were kept up for social reasons. Why did they have these militias? Why did they continue to go? There was no threat any longer. I don't know, because they always had a militia. The law said to have a militia, so they just kept it up because nobody ever did anything to change it. The militia training periods became big social events for the men of the communities. When they had their training, they all showed up and they did their military drills, and on the last day of the training period, they usually held a big ball. And they dressed up in their fanciest uniforms, they polished their buttons and their shoes, and they danced with their wives, and their wives, they got a chance to wear their best dresses once a year. And it was a big occasion when the militia had their training. But all that being said, it is important to say, and it's important to understand, that each town did have a local militia. Each town, each village, each county throughout the colonies, had an organized military organization that could be called up in case of emergency. And another thing very important was that force was not under the control of the British military. It's important to remember that. Yes, the training had gotten to be a little bit slack. When the threat went away, the seriousness of the training went away, but each town had a military organization on paper. Everybody had a rank and everybody had a place in the organizational structure. If you called up that militia, everybody knew where to go, and it was all organized. Now that I have set the pre-war colonial scene, it is important to look at some of the events and the issues that pressed the revolution up to the point of war. Here is a list of, or maybe you can call it a timeline, of some of the major pre-war events that need to be looked at or mentioned in order to gain a full understanding of what happened between the colonies and Great Britain to lead them to the state of war.